Hi, welcome to my multi-purpose room. Welcome to my channel. I'm glad you're here. My name is Elizabeth, and well, this video is not what I had planned this week. Things went sideways in a way that was a bit of a shock, and I did not get near close to what I wanted to have done this week. So our plan this week was to create a floating shelf to rest the paddles on, especially the two that I tried to put up last time and just wasn't successful. So I had been racking my brains about what I could potentially do, and I did come up with a couple of solutions, but they all involved spending money, and I did not want to do that. So I thought about things that I had around the house in the garage, and I came up with the floating shelf idea. Now, the floating shelf idea wasn't mine. It was, I think, Felicia from My Little Realities who suggested it for the office shelves, and it was in my mind, so it was enough to give me a really good idea. And I went with it. It involves painting a couple pieces of wood that are, I don't know, between about 4 feet long, maybe a bit more, and 3/4 of an inch wide, and mounting them on the wall and then resting the paddles on them. So I had used the wood for something else, so filled in the holes, sanded it. Yeah. Well, just continue watching and see what happened. At that moment, when I realized the paint can had opened and spilled, I was just, oh, the image that I had, the picture in my head of paint splattered all over the room was just sickening. It was when I looked and I realized it wasn't all over the room, it was such a relief that I didn't even consider the mess a disaster, because a disaster would have been all over the room. Yeah, I found a lot of paint splatters everywhere, but it could have been 10 times worse. The paint can lid actually didn't come off the paint can all the way. It was only a small portion that stopped. I must have, managed to hang on long enough to clamp it back down. But what ended up spilling, I ended up with about a quarter to a third of the paint still in the can. And, well, I just painted the wood. I mean, why not? The paint was there, it had to be done. And there was paint all over the wood anyway, so I did. And latched onto the idea of putting it back in the can with a paintbrush. So a lot of my paint supplies are out in the garage, and I just went out and got the big fat paintbrush. And I ended up picking up a lot of the paint. What was missing was about a third or a quarter. So it wasn't so bad. And as you can see, the table did not get as much paint on it. Most of it was on the paper, and it was really easy to just gather it up and put it into the garbage. But it was that moment between feeling the paint can opening and looking that was just the most sickening feeling. And it was such a relief that it wasn't that bad that I can't call this a disaster. Let's put it that way. I can call it a mishap. It was exhausting to do the cleanup, but and it took a long time because I had to be careful. There was no point in getting more paint all over the place, but yeah, it had to, making sure that I got it up off the floor so that I didn't track it around the house, and tiptoeing around all the paint splatters while I was trying to get the paper towel and get my clothes clean. But it took it probably took me about an hour to clean that up, and I had to start with the smallest parts first, because they were going to dry first. The clothes were going to dry first, then the little dots on the floor, And, you know, as the puddles got bigger, it was going to take longer to dry. So there was some urgency in getting it done. And then by the time I got to the table, it was, I could still take my time, but I couldn't stop. I mean, I had to get it up. Anyway, I did a pretty good job of getting it up. Now, I just vacuumed, and there are still paint splatters on the floor, especially where the big smear was on the other side of the table. There's still some paint there, but I think it's still fresh enough that I can just scrape it up. It'll just come up because the paint hasn't really fully cured. And there were a couple other spots on the side of the table where the paint was dripping off onto the floor. So it's not, there's not a lot, but yeah, I would say it took me probably an hour to an hour and a half straight working to get this cleaned up. But it could have been worse. The one thing that sort of has struck me about the whole incident is that, you know, when things go well, they go well and you move on. But when they don't, it's memorable. And I don't think I am ever going to forget the process of painting this room, because to be honest, this is the third paint spill I've had, and it was the worst. And, you know, sometimes it's the things that go wrong that cause that help cement the memories, and this is definitely going to cement the memory. I don't think I'm going to look at this room ever again without thinking about paint all over the table. But at least, you know, I was resigned when it happened. I just sort of stood there and looked at it and went, really? And now I'm laughing because it was exhausting to have to spend all of that time cleaning it up. My hands were such a mess afterwards because I kept having to wash the paint off them. But yeah, it was a memory. Well, that's it for this video. Thanks for dropping by. Don't forget to hit that like button, and I would just love it if you would subscribe and join the community. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.